Hey guys, here we are in round 2. We're about to hit round 2 of the film study of Errol Spence for his upcoming fight against Kell Brook. In round 1, we saw that although Errol Spence was doing a lot of some good feinting and stuff, he wasn't able to do anything with it except for establish lead foot dominance, which is like, it's a pretty basic strategy, right? Get lead foot dominance, and then once you're in that position, it's easier for you to land power shots because you're kind of on the side of your opponent. Their left hand is basically, their left hand, like their hook or whatever, is basically, there's no power in it. Even the right hand is hard to get a lot of rotation into because they can't turn their body as much. It's just a great position to be in. Having lead foot dominance in the southpaw orthodox style. But we saw that Chris Algieri's, one of his main points focus was counterpunching. And although he didn't land a lot of shots, he did land a couple. We saw that a lot of it had to do with his technique. His tools are not as sharp as I said. It's a little bit harder for Chris Algieri to build a house because his tools aren't as sharp. Whereas Errol Spence, it's much easier for him because he has very sharp tools. But with that said, we also notice that there are a lot of holes in Errol Spence's defensive game that he doesn't usually have to worry about because, like I said, his tools are so sharp. Even if he doesn't know how to build a house as well as another fighter, his tools are sharper, so he's going to be able to build that house faster. I don't know if that makes sense, man. I hope you guys are with me on that shit because I don't have a better way to explain it. But anyway, we saw that, and we know some things we know about Kell Brook, and I'll do this in my breakdown for our keys to victory. Kell Brook likes to counterpunch. He's good at opening you up. He's also, we talked a little bit about Errol Spence's inactive guard, how his head is always in the same spot. So he's open to the lead right hand, which Kell Brook throws a freaking lot. He loves to throw that punch. He counters the jab with the left hook. We saw Errol Spence get tagged with one of those from Chris Algieri. I think it landed. Can't really tell. And they don't show any highlights of Chris Algieri landing punches, I'll tell you that. But seeing that Errol Spence is not super keen on counterpunching as well, even when he baits his opponent. So one of the fundamentals of probing your opponent is to open them up, right? So you get to move their head, right? So you probe, they think it's a punch, they put themselves out of position to avoid that punch, and then you punch to where their new head slot is, or you punch to their body, right? Or you get them to counterpunch your probe because they think it's a punch, and then you counter their counter because you didn't move out of position to land that, to probe, right? You're still in punching position, and you just trick your opponent into reacting to it and landing shots. We saw that even though he probes, he only probes to get lead foot dominance, and he doesn't probe to set up new shots and create new openings. So even though he's using that tactic to bait movement from his opponent, he hasn't figured out how to do anything with that information yet. The only punches that he's landed aside from the illegal blows that he was landing, the holding and hitting, which are very devastating punches, by the way, have been very simple shots that are open against any fighter. Lead foot dominance, then you throw a straight left to the body because Chris Algieri's exhibited a lot of good head movement, and then the right hook to the body on the outside, which Spence does immaculately. Very, very, very talented fighter, right? Very sharp tools, but he's not creating openings or looking for new openings that are open on Chris Algieri because of Chris Algieri's craft. He's taking openings that are basically always there. They're the same openings that Chris Algieri has when he's fighting Spence. So anyway, and the point for saying that again also, Kell Brook, he's a counter puncher. There are going to be openings that he's going to have for Errol Spence to counter Kell Brook counters, as long as he's willing to engage on that front, and so far it hasn't shown that he was. So it kind of, at the moment, looks that Kell Brook is going to have an advantage in that area. But we'll deal with that when we get to the actual film study of Kell Brook, and I'll point out his countering and his lead right hands and stuff. But, Errol Spence doing some interesting stuff. Some lead hand dominance, and then he goes into a counter jab. Doesn't really follow it up, as good for him. He would have walked into an Algieri left hook, which, look at that. Look at these tools. Look at that right hand after. He's just not in super great position. And Kell Brook's tools are much sharper than Chris Algieri's. So anyway, back to the fight. Watch Spence's guard. He's touching hands. Chris Algieri's maintaining lead hand dominance by touching his glove, and forces Errol Spence to jab, but he's not really in any space, and then he goes to counter with the right hand. Errol Spence does manage to get his hand in the way of it, but Chris Algieri's not like the greatest counter puncher, but he knows enough, so good for Errol Spence for getting out of the way of that. But one of the reasons that he's in the position to be in that situation is because Chris Algieri, although Errol Spence is the bigger, the sharper, whatever, he's the one with the lead hand dominance. He's the one touching gloves in that moment, and he's the one forcing Errol Spence to react to his jab, right? And that's why he puts himself into position. Like that right there, that's exactly what you want to be doing with your lead hand dominance, right? Probing, right? And then probing again gets him to lead, and he commits to the punch, and then you counter him. That's exactly what you want to be doing with your probing shots, and that's something that Errol Spence doesn't really do. He doesn't have that boxing knowledge to take advantage of counter punching like that. So anyway, moving on. Again, he probes, takes lead foot dominance. Neither one of those are jabs. They're not. He's just putting his hand up to distract Chris Algieri, and it works. It does work. Throws a straight left to the body. Whoops. And then the kind of right hand to the back. It's supposed to be a right hand to the body, but Algieri gets his arm around him because he knows it's coming. It's the same thing that Errol Spence did before. So it's hard to even tell whether he blocked the shot or not. We'll give Errol Spence credit for it. It doesn't matter. But he's also showing that he's not setting up punches. He's not. He's just taking what's there, right? So the punch is not going to be as clean as if he were setting them up, right? So Chris Algieri may have blocked partially, whatever. It doesn't matter. We're just pointing out what we're seeing. So moving on. Again, Errol Spence, no head movement. He's not moving. He thinks that Chris Algieri is going to lead hand dominance, gets his hand on top of him, and then Chris Algieri throws a right hand straight through the pipe. Doesn't look like it lands, Let's kind of go back a little bit, and then I'll put it in slow-mo so we can kind of see exactly what happens. So he thinks it's going to be hand control, and then he goes and throws a right hand, and it kind of looks like it stops just short and kind of touches him in the neck, while also Errol Spence is controlling his head. Let me take a look at that head control. No, doesn't get control of his head at all. But does the punch land? The video is so poor. No, it doesn't look like it lands either. But remember, Chris Algieri's tools, they're not the sharpest. It's going to take a long time for this guy to build a house with tools like this. Whereas Kell Brook is much faster, much sharper, and telegraphs his punches much less than Chris Algieri. Even though he telegraphed this punch, he was still able to disguise that it was a right hand and not a jab, and kind of get it through. Kell Brook would have a much easier time. And this is all because Errol Spence doesn't move his head. You know, like, they want to talk about defense, they want to talk about this and that, whatever. But in his guard, in his natural guard, there's nothing crafty about it. You know, and that's why it's so easy to tell also when he's punching, like I said in video 1, because he explodes out into those punches. He doesn't have a natural fluid motion that he moves into them, so it's really easy to time him. Anyway, he moves in, and what does Errol Spence do? Gets his hand on him. Whoops, not random. Gets his hand on him and holds him down here and starts throwing body shots. Super illegal. Should not be throwing punches right there. But it's part of his craft, I guess, you know. I don't agree with that aspect of control. I think you should kind of only control your opponent like in that manner, like holding your opponent's head down or their head close to you or whatever. As a defensive measure, it's still fouling, 100%. But if I trained any of you guys to fight, I would definitely tell you to foul your opponent before letting them hit you with a knockout punch, which is to say props to fighters like Canelo, who don't ever freaking hold. They don't hold their opponent's head down. They don't do anything. You know, they just use they train really hard so that they don't have to do that stuff. So props to fighters like that. There aren't a lot of them. And it's not an easy skill to learn and to master. So props to Canelo for that. Right here, you see him feinting a jab. It's not a real jab, right? Gets his hand on his head and starts throwing the body shot. He telegraphs it, right? Remember I told you he keeps all his weight down on his right leg, but when he's not doing that, he kind of leans into his jab and throws a hard jab, and puts all his weight on his straight front leg. So he telegraphs the punch. Chris Algieri reads it wrong as Errol Spence takes time with the second jab, right, to figure out whether he's throwing it high or low. And when Chris Algieri ducks down, Errol Spence decides to throw it to the body. And notice his right hand, how it's still on Chris Algieri's head, right? And then he still eats a counter, right? Not a great defense, so boom, boom. Keeps his hand. That's another thing I want to point out. After the jab, he keeps his hand on his head, right? He's not holding it right here, so there's nothing wrong with that. That's kind of like measuring your punch, right? If he did throw a headshot, you know, kind of measuring. But this one does land on the arm, so Chris Algieri technically does block it. And then even though he's controlling his head on the way out, he still eats that hook. Good for Errol Spence right there for using his hand to control Chris Algieri's head. But he doesn't wind up getting out of the way of that hook. So good job for Chris Algieri. But again, Errol Spence didn't set that punch up, right? He just kind of jumped in, used hand control, and threw a straight left hand or a left uppercut hook thingy. But it didn't land because it was only one punch, right? He didn't feint it first and make Chris Algieri react to it and then throw a right hook. He didn't do anything out of the ordinary except telegraph that he was going to throw a left hook by getting lead foot dominance and probing jabs. Again, not utilizing any of the information that he gets from actually probing, which kind of just shows that it's more feinting than learning anything from his opponent. You know, very basic stuff right here from Errol Spence so far. Nothing that great. Then throws a jab. You can't really tell with this angle if it's like a hard jab that he's throwing or if he's just putting his hand out there and then holding Chris Algieri's head while he establishes lead foot dominance. I kind of think that's what he's doing. And you also can't tell if he lands that straight left or if Chris Algieri gets in the way of it, the body shot. But again, not setting the punch up, he just throws it, so I'm inclined to believe Chris Algieri is able to block it. But you can't tell. And then Errol Spence lands a quote-unquote body shot right in front of the ref, by the way, and just punches him right in the hip. And it doesn't really land a punch. Not a scoring blow, but it's flashy. He's got sharp tools, so it looks clean and whatever. And then misses the hook on the way out. One good thing that he does do through this exchange, right? So obviously, it's really smart. Blind your opponent with the jab. He gets low again, telegraphing that it's going to be a straight left hand. Throws the body shot on the out or on the end of it, and then he pivots off the line with the hook, right? And then takes a step back, right? So he changes angle after he comes in and gets off the line. That's really smart. That's really important that he's able to do that. So that's definitely one of the skills that he has. Again, when he leads from far away with his jab, he puts all his weight and commits to it, right? That gets a jab. Doesn't even come close to Algieri. Like, I mean, it comes close, you know. But he's in position to be countered right there quite easily. Commits to his feint, right? So look how much he commits to this feint right here. Commits to it. It's not a real jab. He sits down again on his left hand, and then Chris Algieri tags him with a counter, right? Countering him really easily. Chris Algieri does get hit too. If you look again, he gets hit, but it's not like a power shot. It's with the inside of his arm. I think it kind of like maybe forearm kind of, whereas Chris Algieri's is kind of with the glove. Again, he doesn't have great tools. This man, it's going to take a long time for this man to build a house, but he just clobbers him with that shot and makes him move back. Again, Kell Brook is a much sharper fighter. He's got much better power, much better power. And better timing. You know, his tools are better. He's a bigger man. And he's going to be able to counter Errol Spence much better than this. Again, this stems from this feint. Look how far out his arm comes with this feint, right? Completely selling out for it. You don't have to commit that hard to that kind of punch. And that's one of the things that Errol Spence is going to have to work on is his feinting. But again, actual boxing skills. Errol Spence is a puncher. You know, he wants to set you up for a big shot, you know, and land big shots on the ropes. So this is really interesting right here. He jabs, and look at how he gets his hand on top of his head and tries to pull it back, right? You can see his hand scrape through his hair like that. And in that instance, I think that he was hoping that Chris Algieri would slip inside, and then he could pull his head down and land some more left hands while holding him. It's not important, you know, it's not that big of a deal. We'll see more instances where he does do that. But again, comes in, gets low, no defense, establishes lead foot dominance. Where does that left hand even go? Way over his head. And then Spence lands his left hand, I think. This video quality is so horrible, isn't it? So he misses, and then Spence lands kind of on the shoulder. I think it hits him. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But, again, now Spence is holding his arm and throwing punches. Very illegal, very dirty fighting, getting up against the ropes. And none of this should even be taking place. The referee should have been stepping in and telling Spence to stop that because it's not legal, right? Bullying him and pushing him into the ropes while holding him, right? Not fair. This part right here where after he lets go, right? Here, how he pushes him up against the ropes, that's fine, right? Touches him right there to get him to open up, throws that hand inside. Spence misses this punch, but look at these punches from Spence. Look at how open he is for counters. No defense whatsoever. I thought I saw another instance of him trying to hold and hit, but my video is kind of freezing right now. Let's go back again. Holding him behind the head again, throwing an uppercut again. Very dirty fighting. And if you watch the highlights of PBC for this fight, those are all of the highlights is Errol Spence holding and hitting. Those were almost the only times that he was able to land punches against Chris Algieri. Now that he's got him hurt and in the corner from these big illegal punches, he can't really move. But what is what is Errol Spence even doing? Did he land those punches? They're on the gloves. They're hard shots, but just throwing punches, kind of clobbering him. He sets that one up pretty well, probes, then unfortunately kind of controls his head again. You know, he doesn't have to hold his head down to land that punch as much, but he shouldn't be doing it at all. Again, a lot of dirty tactics, and a lot of that is going to be wearing on Chris Algieri, and it's gonna, you know, wear him down a little bit, and that's a lot of wear that shouldn't have taken place. But boom, there again, lead right hand, because Errol Spence doesn't move his head, catches the shot, and he look at how he even has control. He even has control of him with the probes, right? Probing, and controls his head, and still just eats a shot because he doesn't know what to do when he makes his opponent react first, because he's not a counterpuncher, right? He made Chris Algieri move from here, right, in his boxing stance to here and eats a shot. So he goes from here to here and eats a shot. And once he moves his head down, that's where he should be looking to throw an uppercut, right, or take an angle, right? He gets Chris Algieri to react first, and then he's able to counter. But he shows right here that even though he has control of him, he doesn't know what to do with it. Now he controls him, and he does throw the punch, but it doesn't land. Chris Algieri circles out away from it. Again, some good stuff, right? Jab, probing jab, throws a straight left, doesn't really land, gets him to dip down. It might even be just a probing straight left, right? Not even that hard. Yeah, probing straight left. Gets him to duck down and then throws that right hook. Really smart. But he should be able to do that in more places than when his opponent his back is against the ropes. And there you go. Because he commits to the jab, and he gets, or like the feint, he commits to it, puts his arm out. He eats a shot, and he's not able to counter after he gets Chris Algieri to react to it. See how he didn't commit to this as a punch, right? He just kind of walks in, and he's not able to set up offense off of Chris Algieri's movement, right? So he should be able to like rip that jab back and just crack Chris Algieri with the straight left hand. But he doesn't know how to counter punch. He doesn't know how to use that punch to set his opponent up. He doesn't know how to probe to set his opponent up for offense. So he probes with that jab, and Chris Algieri just walks off the ropes and lands a hook. Let's look at this. He dips down, tries to land a left uppercut to the body, kind of. And then Errol Spence wisely controls his head. See how he gets his jab on him? Controls his head, and that's smart. This kind of control is okay because he's not holding him to him, right? Chris Algieri from this position could pivot out, right? He could also just move back. So I don't really have a problem with controlling his head in that situation, but holding your opponent's head down and punching him, very, very dirty. Anyway, again, Errol Spence, no head movement. Chris Algieri just dips down, and I think he touches him with that right hand, and then he kind of snakes forward, controlling his head now, but it took him a while, and holding his head down and throwing an uppercut. Again, I don't have a problem with you controlling your opponent's head, as long as you use it for defense. If you're going to hold your opponent's head down and punch, I think you should be losing points. And at this point, the referee should absolutely be taking points from Errol Spence. This is like the fourth, fifth time that he's done that. But Errol Spence is going to be the next big thing on PBC. Everyone thinks so because they see his tools, right? They see how sharp he is. They think that automatically is indicative of his ability to fight. And even against a fighter like Chris Algieri, whose tools are so dull, he's shown that he doesn't have the skills to set his punches up. He doesn't know what to do when he gets his opponent to react. So even though he's using some high-level skills, he doesn't know what to do with the tools that he has, right? He doesn't know how to build a house, I'll say. Yeah, and this is why you give fighters, and I don't know how many fights Errol Spence has. I don't pay attention to any of that stuff. It doesn't matter to me. But this is why you have a top 10. This is why you have the guy fight the number 10 guy, the number 9 guy, the number 8 guy. And you don't just be like, oh, wow, look at how flashy and strong and power punching and fast, and look at how sharp this guy is. You can tell he's going to be a world champion one day. That's why you don't just take these guys and throw them in with seasoned world champions. Like, I know that Kell Brook at least fought like 700 bums in the UK before he started stepping up, and everyone's talking all this shit about how he's fighting bums and he's fighting nobody and his career is going so slow. That's how you're supposed to do it, you know? So you can figure out all these little tricks. You can learn one trick from this fighter, one trick from that fighter, you know? And then when you beat those fighters, you know, sometimes through like Errol Spence having better tools, being sharper, being faster, hitting harder, or being a better athlete, or whatever you want to call it, you're able to take tools from each of these fighters, learn new things, and add them to your craft and be a culmination of all the fighters and all the experience that you have. And then you fight for a world title and you're a good fighter, you know? Or you just have fighters like Andre Berto who have no craft, and they're world champion on HBO because they're fast and they hit hard and they have sharp tools even though they don't know how to build a house. Anyway, I hope that building a house shit isn't getting old because I've been saying it a fucking lot. I even think it's stupid. But anyway, back to this house. Some feinting, again, gets lead foot dominance. And even though Errol Spence is getting Chris Algieri to react first, no counters, he just moves back, showing that he doesn't really know how to counter. Again, puts all his weight on his right leg, dips down, you know the right hand's coming. He threw 2 probing jabs, established lead foot dominance, the same exact thing that he's been doing all this time. And I can't see where that punch lands. Forgive me, I'm not trying to not give Errol Spence credit. My video quality is crap and my monitor is really slow. So I think he does land that shot. I think Errol Spence does land that shot. Gets his hand on top of Chris Algieri's head, remember? Again, holding his head and then throwing a punch. It's not legal. You know? It's interesting, like in this aspect, it's kind of like using your hand as a rangefinder, right? You measure your opponent and then you throw a right hand, boom, or a straight left in Errol Spence's case. But you can't hold their head there, you know? And that's a little less of what he's doing in this situation, so I'm going to give him some slack. This is much more of a measuring, but you want your hand on in front of them, not on top of their head, so that they can't escape, you know. And it's not super clear that that's what's happening, but it's not super clear that that's not what's happening. That's not what's happening either. But again, he does do a good thing in that situation with his double jab. He figures out where Chris Algieri's going with his head movement because everyone knows that Errol Spence is going to throw the left hand now. And he does pick his shot really well in that situation. Now, in this situation, where's his defense, man? What is he? He's just throwing a huge punch. Doesn't look like it lands. He does have some good movement after he throws it, but where's the defense? Does he think that he has Chris Algieri hurt and that's why he's opening up like this? Well, whatever. Boom. A probing. He throws that one hard, and then this is a probing left hand, gets his hand on him, holds his head there. I'm a little less against holding his head there so he can't move back, so you throw the body shot. Again, as long as you're not holding your opponent's head down, because Chris Algieri could still grab him or move his hand or whatever. But when it's on the back of your neck, you know, there's not a lot you can do. Then does the body shot, then uses his forearm to create space a little bit, pushes on his gloves, throws the right hook. That's really smart. That's some good inside fighting. Misses the jab right there, controls his head, and pulls down his guard, right? Throws a straight left hand. Those are some real boxing skills right here. This is some good stuff. But why is he not able to do this when Chris Algieri's not hurt, right? Why isn't he able to do this when he's fighting him against the ropes? Or not against in the middle of the ring and not against the ropes? Anyway, probing, misses that shot. Chris Algieri kind of tries to counter him. Again, he doesn't get a lot of work done while he's on the ropes. But, some decent stuff. But again, Errol Spence being a puncher. He's not really boxing him. He's not setting his shots up super well. Jab, jab. Gets lead foot dominance, where it would be. Throws a left hand. Misses that left hand because he overcommits to it, right? Holds his head down, right? Then holds his head down again. Throws a punch at the back of the head. What the hell, man? Come on, Errol Spence. Stop that shit. Throws a jab, not committing to it. That's what he should be doing. And see, he's able to counter that, or he's able to block that counter because it wasn't a hard jab, right? But he thinks he has him hurt. He's able to block it. But he doesn't follow up because he's not a counter puncher. Again, backs him up to the rope with some, probing offense. And because Algieri doesn't respond, he eats a straight left hand. Probing gets him to react, but I kind of think he thought that he was just going to stay there. And Chris Algieri is able to get out of the way. Jesus, 30 minutes on this round again. I talk too much, guys. I'm so sorry. I hope none of this was droning on or anything. Again, Errol Spence, fake jab, gets his hand on the back of Chris Algieri's head, holds him down while establishing lead foot dominance, and throws an uppercut. Super dirty fighter, man. He has shown, like, in almost every instance that he's not able to land a solid shot without holding and hitting. Chris Algieri really putting it on him, and if it wasn't for the holding and hitting and all the credit that Spence got for that, people would probably be screaming exposed. I know I would be. But then again, when I'm interested in a fighter, I take the time to do film study, look at what skills they have, what skills they don't, what they are doing, what they aren't doing well. And then I decide whether they're a good fighter. All this shit that I'm talking about, Errol Spence, it's only because we're discussing real boxing skills. It's not because I have anything against him. Am I going to miss any Errol Spence fights coming up in the next, 5 years? Probably fucking not, because I do like the fact that he's sharp and he's fast and he hits hard and he's fun to watch, even though a lot of his tactics are dirty and some of the stuff that he has going are very limited because he's still a young fighter. Can he grow and become a better fighter? Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. He's going to need a new coach, someone to teach him something other than holding and hitting, because that shit's, if he's doing that to Kell Brook in the UK, there's no way he's going to get away with that. Kell Brook has his own holding and hitting, and he might get away with it there, but like Anthony Joshua, right? Anthony Joshua was getting away with fouls, and Vladimir Klitschko was getting warned for bullshit. So, anyway, again, Errol Spence showing that he's not a counterpuncher. He doesn't know what to do when his opponent is reacting to what he does. He doesn't utilize the feints and the probing that he uses. So feinting and probing is not actually a skill that he has, because he only uses it to establish lead foot dominance, to throw big left hands. Because Errol Spence is a very basic fighter. And we'll get more into that, again, like I said, with the Kell Brooks fights and the Kell Brook film study. I'm very excited to do that stuff too. Although the quality of opposition is going to be about Algieri level, Kell Brook does some really great things in there, as well as some dirty stuff of his own. But anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, and subscribe. Share my videos. If you think something I said was stupid or whatever, let me know in the comments in a civil way, and I'd love to see like a response video if you guys have that too. Anyway, like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know what you think. Thanks, guys.